For this talk was because we had some people in the community that said, let's do like how to do an online game, and I think that is very ambitious for a lot of indies to try to take that on, especially because for an online game to be successful, it has to not only be online but also have a lot of people playing at the same time, and with everyone's attention divided between things, that's a big risk to learn all that stuff just to build an online game. So with that context, this is a way to using a backend-as-a-service is a way to mitigate the risk of having to learn all that stuff, while still being able to test out some of those online game ideas you might have. Maybe. So, yeah. So things that my experience with backend-as-a-service is trying a lot of different things. So Parse is an old backend-as-a-service platform for mobile, for iOS and Android. That was my first experience with it. It's also one of the early pioneers. It did pretty well, and then they got bought out by Facebook, and then a year later got shut down. You can still use it. They open source the server, but the actual remote servers, like hosted by someone else, those don't really exist anymore. I did find out, this is interesting, when I was doing this talk, parts of FIREBASE use some of the mono parse code. So some of that open source stuff got picked up and then taken to other places, so it will still live on. It's also still an open source project that you can use and join. What I learned from that and them shutting down was Parse is a really, really heavy framework. And as a very heavy framework, if you invest putting your game into it and then they shut down, that is very painful. So, so that is something you want to avoid. Next is Node.js, which is not a backend-as-a-service, but I did kind of try to roll my own thing. And got to where I needed players to authenticate, and bang my head against it. You try to use a couple frameworks, and it's a pain in the butt. There's frameworks to help you do it, but you're taking on a huge, huge task if you try to create an entire authentication system. And then if you want to add in the ability to authenticate through Facebook or any other platform, you're going to have to build that yourself too. And it just ends up like what feels like it should be a simple thing, just like get someone's name, becomes an enormous task that you don't have to do. The actual code, it sounds simple because the actual code is not that hard, but the setup and all that security and all those things you don't want to have to deal with, that's where it really weighs you down. So I recommend not trying to roll your own thing unless you're 100% sure you're going to be successful, and you're not. The next thing is Amazon Web Services. Amazon Web Services is probably what's living behind pretty much everything else. It is behind GameSparks for sure. But Amazon Web Services, it allows you to basically rent server space and send it up as you need it. And that basically de-risks the platform shutting down because you can just move that wherever you want. But that's really expensive. Way to mitigate that is they split up all of their offerings into little services that handle one thing or the other thing or another thing. And because of that, it handles a ton of things completely disparately. And it's not really opinionated. It's a little bit opinionated, but it doesn't really create a simple, here's how these things are going to interact. It's harder to learn and harder to get going in. And for that reason, it's probably the cheapest one, but...
So you said opinionated?
Yeah, I say opinionated in terms of you can use any Amazon, any of the individual services in Amazon, independent of pretty much all the other ones. They're not really, it's not trying to push you toward using it all together intrinsically. Everything kind of lives independent of each other and kind of overlaps a little bit. That's why, it's kind of, maybe that's not the right word for it, but yeah, it's the cheapest of many of these things. I don't know if it counts as a backend-as-a-service because it's not really kind of a standalone thing that's solving it for you, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, I'm using it on a side project, and it does work well, and obviously. And then the two main ones we're going to focus on today are going to be FIREBASE and GAMESPARKS. I have some experience in FIREBASE. If you came to the drink up, we had that sign-in app. I built the backend for that in FIREBASE. I've also, at my job, for one of my projects that needed an admin portal to like kind of manage the data, I used FIREBASE to host the admin portal, and then also to like store the data and like allow people to upload pictures and stuff like that. We'll get into how you do that, the mechanics of that tonight. And then finally, GameSparks is the game-dedicated Backend-as-a-Service platform that we'll talk about too. Cool, and we'll demo FIREBASE and GameSparks in the context of a game. So, all right, first, make the case for not doing it for just yourself. It's risky, it's expensive, you would need hardware to host it, which you're gonna have to pay for somehow. You're gonna need developers to develop it because it's gonna be the hardest thing, doing it by yourself. It's gonna be time consuming. And we talked about all those things, but that all adds up to money because time is money. It is risky because we talked about security earlier. There's also scalability. If you set up one server that's hosting your one thing, if your game blows up, you're gonna probably hit a wall and have to scramble to solve that problem. And then reliability, if it's just sitting under your desk, someone kicks it over, you're kind of in trouble. All of these, you're putting that on someone else. The other thing, because of those other things, it reduces barriers to experimentation. So a lot of games don't do things like analytics because they don't find it valuable. A lot of games don't have user accounts because it's too hard. A lot of games could be doing things like feature toggle, but it just feels like the investment in all the infrastructure to do that is really high. But if you take all of that investment away and it's just given to you for free because you're using the platform, then you're more willing to experiment with things like that. It's going to make your games better. FIREBASE, first is the first one I'm going to talk about. Launched in April 2012. Its main product was a real-time database, which we'll talk about. It's really cool. Hosting and authentication were added in 2014. You don't really care about that. The one you care about is acquired by Google in October 2014, which is similar to that acquired by Facebook, except for instead of being acquired by Google and getting shut down, FIREBASE has grown and kind of taken over most of what Google's cloud offerings have been, and kind of pivoted it toward like a clean API front end toward really complicated things that you can do using the cloud platform. So it's kind of like a simple API wrapper version around Google's version of AWS. So basically, instead of having to stand up all these things independently and figure out how they can talk to each other, you just use FIREBASE and it takes care of all that. Yep, and then they launched a new type of database recently called Firestore, which is just more scalable, easier to separate your data types and wrap security on certain things. So
is it a NoSQL database or a relational?
they're both NoSQL databases. Yeah, and there's no relational database available through FIREBASE, which is fine because it can do most of everything. It has Firestore does some things to make it less of a pain that it doesn't exist. You can sort by keys using the Firestore version of the database, and it's a lot nicer. Okay, cool. Talk about cost. If you click on that link, we can get into the specific details, but high-level concept, it's free for to get started and up to 100 concurrent users, which is fine for all development and then a lot of smaller games. And then if your game hits 100 concurrent users, you can go up to the $25 a month plan, which is not that bad. If you've hit that, 100 concurrent users, you probably will be able to get more. So the $25 is not that big of a deal. And then Blaze is pay as you go. It also doesn't get super high unless you do something stupid or you're just kind of pay attention to what you're doing, figure out a way to do it better. And then a lot of the features from Firebase are always free no matter what tier you're at. And those are the things that I talked about earlier that you might not spend your time to do normally, but if they're available to you and you get it for free, then you'll be more likely to do it. So yeah, the idea is that it's free until you should be making enough money to pay for it. And then when it becomes expensive, then you have enough money to replace it if you need to. So yeah, it's good. Okay, so to set up, I've used Firebase before outside of Unity for mobile. For this, to try to figure out what's best for games, I used the Unity SDK and incorporated it into a project, and you'll see that in a little bit. Setting it up is very simple. You just create a Unity project. You create a project on the web at firebase.com or firebase.google.com. You download a plist that it creates for you for iOS or a JSON file for Android, and then you add that in the root directory of your or in the assets directory of Unity. You download the SDK, which is just like a big list of importable Firebase, any kind of plugins you get for Unity. There's just a whole bunch of them that support different features from Firebase. You import Firebase Analytics and then whatever other things you need that you want. It's just the same as importing any project. And then you build once, and then you add an analytic, you run the app once, and the Firebase website will notice that you have an app attached to it because of the authentication stuff in here, and it will suddenly open up all the features. So you just basically have to build it once, and then you can do whatever you want. So that's how it should work. It says if everything is set up correctly. One of the pains I had in trying to get this set up was the Unity and games are not as big a part of Firebase's offerings. So a lot of the documentation is not as great, and some of the stuff I had to do was I had to make some tweaks to get it to work. So it was easy to Google and find the answers, but it was kind of a pain in the butt, bigger pain in the butt than I expected. But it's not as big of a pain in the butt as the other things. I got it all done in a day, but definitely it's harder than I expected, but got it working. So. And then I mentioned that parse kind of collapsed, so I want to talk a little bit more about trustworthiness. Firebase is by Google. So I already kind of talked about this stuff. One thing is that SDKs are now open source, so if they do collapse, then you have access to the SDKs and you can do what you want with it. Real-time database is probably going to be replaced by Cloud Firestore. But real-time database is all that Unity has, so just be aware of that when you start using it. And it's primarily used for mobile apps, like I said. So the Unity stuff is not as good as it could be. Okay, now I talked about AWS and all the big plethora of features. This is all the stuff that Firebase offers. It's a ton of stuff, and you'll notice a lot of words like A/B testing, cloud messaging. Actually, the way that you send notifications to Android used to be through Google Cloud Messaging. They shut that down completely and Firebase took over. So pretty much every Android app that you get a remote message from has Firebase built into it. So people are using this like crazy because Google is forcing them to send notifications. So the analytics that Firebase gives you by default has into Google Analytics. You just choose something in the drop down, you can see that analytics in Google Analytics as well. And we'll do a deep dive into some of these, and that's where the fun is. So one of the things, Unity only offers a subset of the overall Firebase features. If you're doing a Unity app, a Unity mobile app, then you get access to all of these. If if you're doing a Unity desktop app, it slims out some of those things. Some of them make a ton of sense, like Crashlytics kind of makes sense because it's targeting the specific device, and on desktop, people kind of don't know about their devices. Like cloud messaging, your desktop doesn't get like alerts the same way your mobile does. But generally, yeah, ads and analytics, those things are really structured for mobile from FIREBASE. But these things are what's really cool about it anyways. And should also be noted, there's no Unreal Engine support, but there are some third-party libraries. I saw one for like $25 that allows you to use FIREBASE in the Unreal project. And I don't know how good that is, but they're charging for it.
Does it have a C++ API?
It does have a C++ API, but I don't know how. I don't know. I guess I don't know enough about Unity to know if how that would work.
No, I mean, in Unreal, it wouldn't be too crazy to probably set one up.
Yeah, and there's a JavaScript API too. So anything that talks to the web, you can just run it through JavaScript and do stuff. Okay. So now I'm going to show you what the interface would looks like when you're in the actual, what is it called, dashboard for FIREBASE on the web. Let me, oh, it's fine. I'll just do it up here. So you create a separate project for each of your apps, and then within that, you will create whatever platforms that app is going to run against, and it kind of encapsulates all of the different versions of that app across iOS, Android. These are actually Unity versions, but they don't separate those out. But web is another one that would show up there. So how often they're using the app. You can set up funnels that can see how many users are making their way toward the feature that you care about. It might make you money. You can see how many crashes there are if you have Crashlytics set up. And all of it is right here. Where the acquisition is coming from. Most of this stuff you get for free. Like, you don't have to do anything special to see where people are coming from. That's just stuff that FIREBASE, when you add the platform, when you add the framework in, it's going to capture that stuff. Yeah. And all of this is analytics. Authentication, this is the thing I was talking about earlier that's a huge pain to do yourself. This is kind of what I was talking about, the sign-in method. You can sign in to a user account in FIREBASE from any one of these things, and you can enable and disable them as you want. I did email password, and when you set it up with email password, you can customize your email. It's going to get sent to them, where they click the link and approve it, and all of that stuff's handled for you. You don't have to do any of the email server setup or anything like that. Phone is a weird one. I don't know how that works, but I didn't want to do it. Yeah, it's got Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, Microsoft, pretty much anything that you'd want. And if you want to allow people to connect to multiple platforms, you can include a bunch of them and group them under a certain device, or as a certain user ID. So it's very, very, very useful.
You said on the email, was that a generic email sent that you said?
Oh, you can set up your own template here.
Oh, okay.
So whatever you want to put in there. Yep. And then you just do that here. And then when you hit save and sign in, it'll send this email to the person that signs up, and you don't have to worry about it. I signed up for an account, but no one else has. Okay, database. This is real cool. So here's the two different types of databases. Real-time database, there's some data in here. This is kind of what I was talking about with the JSON database. So I created a game in here, and then the player that's playing that game is this one. And you'll see how that's happened. Well, you won't see the code unless you want to, but this is being pushed from the game. The really, really cool thing about the real-time database is you can listen at a single tier. So let's say you want to know when a new game comes in. You can set up a socket that's listening to that games node, and whenever a game is added, you can get alerted and told immediately, oh, there's a new game, and then have your screen update or whatever. So, and you can do that at any specific level. What I wanted to demo and what I wanted to test out, this is where I think this could be cool for like actually allowing you to do real-time multiplayer games, since it's socket-based, and since you can set up a data structure that can mirror your game state. What you could theoretically do is store your game state in this table. Whenever something happens, just modify that section of it, and then as the game state changes, you can show that state in real time on your device. So you could essentially just like use this and its persistence as a mirror of that specific game. And if that makes sense.
So you can like have saves points and stuff.
No, you could, like, if two people are playing, that's what I was going to try to do. If two people are playing, you could create a game, create multiple players under that game, and then put both of their positions in. And then as those positions change, you can show both of the players moving around in real time on both of their screens. Because this is representing the locations of the players, and it's listening in real time on the socket to what's changing. You can just have your characters move around and have the data be shared through this. For an asynchronous game, that would be even easier because you just listen for when another player makes their move, and then when the other player makes their move, get updated, send a notification, hey, this person made their move, and then they jump in, make their move, and you can basically keep a log of all of the moves, and then you could go through this and verify that it all makes sense to make sure that you're not that the game's rules are actually working and you're not breaking the game logic. No one's cheating, basically. So the cloud, putting all of the data and all of the logic in the cloud will keep people from being able to cheat because it's all happening outside of their hands. But yeah, we'll see this update in real time and you'll maybe get a better sense of what I was talking about in a minute. Storage, I didn't set up, but what you can do here is if you have like a game where people take pictures of themselves or like record a voice and then other people can hear it, you can just upload this stuff to the storage area and then give access to it however you want. I'll talk for a second about security since I didn't earlier. The way that security works in this is you set up security rules in JSON, and in here you can set it to only allow people that are logged in. You can say only people that are logged in can write data, other people can read it. You can set it up so that the database, certain tiers have different security access. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay, hosting. If you want to stand up a website, like single page web app, whatever, just throw some files up here, and then you'll get a website hosted that anyone can go to. And you can point the DNS at whatever URL you want, and then you have a hosted website that you're not really paying for the hosting. So that's very cool. And that's what we used in that project I was talking about earlier to create an admin panel. Because one of the things that's a pain is if you're a developer and you're working you're maybe doing work for a designer. That designer, asking them to jump in and understand the JSON to create like stuff in the database might be a big ask. So what you can do instead is create a website that lets them kind of tweak things on their own, and they'll just update it in the database on the fly. Just an idea.
When you say you can throw files up there, I mean, you can throw like a website, kind of like with JavaScript that will interact with the database?
Yep, single page app. And then because it's through here, giving up, like doing authentication and stuff is pretty simple.
How much space do you think there's going on?
You can use whatever you want, and it's like the rest of the pricing tier. It's generally free until you're successful, and then if you're really successful, it'll be worth it. So it's kind of, it all follows kind of that same structure. I'll
I
go.
would also guess since it's a Google product, it's probably limited by your local Google space. Like
No,
Docs and-
this is all separate. This isn't tied to that at all.
It's a guess.
Here, let me do pricing real quick. So all the analytics and all this stuff is free no matter what tier. Real-time database, you get up to a gig of data.
There it says.
That's the JSON file. So if you have a 1 gig JSON file, then they start charging you. So
It says 5 gigs of storage.
yeah,
Free.
that's the storage of images and stuff. But the storage of hosting is 1 gig, which is a separate set from the other data. So you have like 1 gig of space, and then you have 10 gigs of transfer. So depending on how much stuff you have up there, probably not going to have everyone that comes to the site pull down a gig. And what you can do is make your website and host it, and then put all the heavy files in the storage area, and then that doesn't count toward your hosting. So all your images can be in storage, and then your website can be in hosting, and you're essentially spreading it out because it doesn't. There's no overlap between these pricing tiers. So yeah. And then there's really good documentation around these things. So if you want to set up a hosted website that talks to FIREBASE, they basically have examples that, like on here that you can just kind of like. You can't just copy and paste them because there's like weird things missing from everything. But if you understand what you're doing, it's pretty simple. They walk you through pretty much everything. And it's popular enough at this point that Googling will generally get you the answer that you want. Okay, functions, I haven't really messed with, but the idea of functions is you can do JavaScript or TypeScript, and you can write a function that lives out at a URL. When you call that URL, it'll call that function and do whatever that function says. And you can tie that into any part of FIREBASE. So you can have a function fire whenever one section of your database is modified. You can fire a function that sends a notification to someone. You can fire a function that will send out an email. You can do that on a batch process where like every day you run a function that cleans up all the old games that people aren't playing anymore, and that the database, the functions in here are super powerful. But I haven't really messed with them because I haven't really used it for a game. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but GameSpark is basically a combination of these functions in this database in a lot of pre-constructed ways, and that'll come back in a little bit. But it's essentially like these functions are the all-powerful thing that allows you to basically do whatever you want in the cloud. So, and I don't have an example here, but you'll see one later. And then MLKit is kind of it's machine learning. So if you want to do some machine learning, you can use this. This is kind of, I played around with this a little bit. When you hit get started, it just takes you to like Google Cloud. So this is really just a wrapper for Google Cloud machine learning. But it's a way of like, because FIREBASE is more popular with like normal like app developers than not like enterprises. I think they want just independent smart people that just have ideas to start doing machine learning. So they incorporated it into FIREBASE. to try to basically encourage people like us to use it. So, and it's just as cheap as all the other stuff. So with machine learning, you can do things like vision, like if someone uploads a picture, you can try to figure out if there's a bird in it or something. I don't know. So, is there a bird in it game? It's the don't steal that. All right. Does anyone have any questions? Kind of like a ton of data, or a ton of information. Probably don't understand how it all fits together. Does anyone want to have any questions?
I guess a cool question. I might have missed it. Is there a limit on how many projects you create on the free version?
I don't think so. And I think,
I'm sure the data limits are across all projects.
I don't know if they are, because otherwise you just create another account and then set up that project.
Have a whole bunch of storage. You think it's still
I think it's by project, because each project also has its own like security, and you can add a bunch of people to it. So if you add a bunch of people to one project but not another project, how would they determine which of those, like, how your tier is getting up there? So I'm not really sure. Yeah.
Wes, do you have any idea what
Okay.
majority of games use as back-end services? What might be the most used?
I don't know. Do you have more experience? Do you
Sorry, say
do you
what
have any?
What might be the most used back-end service?
GameSparks is pretty well used, but I mean, if you want the least amount of effort possible, generally you go with the backend that your store provides. So Steam backend has its own achievements, stats, leaderboards, as well as like Discord is one that I haven't implemented from scratch, unfortunately. Fresh code, lots of bugs in that bad boy for Unreal. So
I mean, UA has analytics. I don't know if that's the same exact stuff as far as like stats for resolution, time it's played, where it's formulated, stuff like that.
Okay, so let's see this stuff in action. So here's a game that I've been kind of playing around with in my free time. I didn't get very far, but I got far enough to tie other code into it.
Did you make those sprites?
I was gonna say nice pixel art.
I bought them from one of those free, one of the Google, yeah, the asset collection things. Cool. So I'm gonna hit play. All right. So, oh shoot. Yeah. Okay. Hold on. Let me get back out of here and make sure.
Your roof is
Yeah, I know. It's not great. It's fine.
It's in development.
It is sort of in development. Hold on.
It's not early access.
Yeah, super early. Okay, yeah. So I have this set up to switch between FIREBASE and GameSparks right now, and it'll do the same kind of things in both platforms. So first we'll show you FIREBASE. If I can find, oh, I'm over here. All right, play. So this will kick it off and log you and create a FIREBASE session. You'll see down here, FIREBASE /app. You can create multiple apps for different environments if you want. So in this app, this guy can walk around. The animation's not that great either, but the screen moves up and down. So camera locks. You can kind of run into stuff. But that's not what's cool. Let's go over here. So his position is updating in real time as he walks around. So I'm just updating the database with his current position relative to the screen. Now what you could do with this, since it's in real time, is let other people like share positions in the database across the whole world and have any number of players join. And as long as this database doesn't get over a gig in players, then it'll be free. So, and right now I'm not listening, but people can listen to all of these changes in real time. So you could create essentially like an open space armada with players all over the world interacting in the same universe, and this database is just representing whatever that universe is. So, yeah, lots and lots of cool stuff. The other thing that you'll see, and this is something that I learned, if we try to sign in or create an account, that's an error message that comes up. It wasn't coming up for a really long, it's because I already have an account. For a long time it wasn't coming up and I couldn't figure out why. It's because despite using Unity, which is single-threaded, whenever you get the responses back in FIREBASE, it comes back in a background thread, and Unity doesn't really know how to handle that. So you kind of have to write your own code to add it to a queue that will pick it back up alongside the main thread, which is not related to this at all, except for GameSparks just handles it out of the box. So GameSparks is more thinking, like their Unity support is a little bit like it understands that it's going to be using Unity instead of just kind of shoehorning it in. So, so that's one thing that you don't really get. That, but yeah, sign in. Now we have a player ID, and you'll see. I think it's always going to be the same player ID for now, unless I create a new user. Maybe we'll try it. This is Randy. I'll try Wes. Keep the same password. Test user 2. Nope. Now when I hit create an account, you get the same error. Dang. Okay. Oh well. Oh, it's because I didn't change my email. Right. There we go. So now I created a new account, and that's proof that it actually did it because it gave me back a different error message. And then you can sign in. We talked about that, but what that's doing, and what we'll see here, is when you go to authentication, there's now 2 accounts in here, and each of those accounts has a unique ID, and that ID doesn't change. So as long as you're using that ID to key off the player, you can change their name, change their email, whatever. They'll still be the same account, and you can use that however you want. So yeah, cool. While I have this up, does anyone have any questions or want to see anything else? I can show you.
I have one question.
Okay.
So, just because of a lot of stuff that's moving on lately, top of mind for me is always GDPRS compliance. Since this is a database, does it have any built-in stuff for like right to be forgotten and all that stuff for you players?
That's a good question. So I don't know that it has anything built in, but Google has. If you've been using this for a couple of years, you'll notice some changes. Crashlytics used to allow you to add an email and a username. Those have been taken out of the framework, so you can no longer do that kind of thing. So they discourage you from shooting yourself in the foot now, which is different than what it used to be. So that will subtly guide you in the right direction, but since it's just a database, it's not going to prevent you from doing anything.
Yeah.
Hold on. Here's the same game running on a iPhone. Woo! Okay.
Question from Twitch is, did you say anything in regards to password security? Like, does it hash the passwords?
Oh yeah, totally. Yep. You won't see the password anywhere inside of this framework at all. So yeah, you won't even see that they have a password because you don't have access. That entire part of the how they're storing that is sectioned off from what you can access. So as long as FIREBASE/Google doesn't get hacked at like a root level, then what you do is fine. So
You utilize the notch. Your buttons aren't covered by the notch on the F1X software.
Oh, it was totally planned. Totally planned. Yeah, this little text. All right. Anyways, I just thought I got iOS app working. Let me kill that real quick. All right, and we can go back to the presentation. Oh, I was going to show where the plist goes. So how this actually changes your project is not that. This will make more sense if you've used Unity before, but creates this FIREBASE section with all this stuff under it. And that's just depends on what frameworks you have. It'll add more stuff. All you need to do to get this up and running is essentially add this plist right here. Or these JSON documents. Don't. Okay. Let's see. Okay, back to presentation mode for a little bit. Okay. So some of the bad things about FIREBASE, there's no real tech support. A few times that I've had issues and we've called tech support, they've been totally not helpful at all. So, so you really can't depend on that. There's forums and stuff, but even at the higher tiers, like we've had on a separate project, we've had trouble figuring out how to pay them, and there's nobody to really talk to give them money. So yeah, no real tech support. Another thing, the APIs seem simple, but getting things to work can be kind of clunky. Unity desktop supports in beta, and that I felt that a little bit. Crashlytics for Unity are in beta. I couldn't get any crashes to log, but that could have been my setup. I didn't take that long. Currently limited features for desktop, so I think I already mentioned that, but like the desktop version sucks away analytics and a lot of other things. And if it fails doing something equivalent, probably won't be like pick it up and move it over. There'll be ways to make it easier, but like meaning at FIREBASE itself, it's pretty. It will stick around for a long time, but in 10 years, who knows what's going to happen? But if it doesn't do, if it fails and like they say we're going to shut it down in a couple months, then you're probably going to have to do some work. So, yep. All right, and now GameSparks, the complete games-as-a-service platform. GameSparks, you'll see the features have some overlap, but they're like viewed through a very different lens. They have events. You can define user events, and then create data. You create data structures, and then you create events for those data structures, and then you call them from your code, and the events get fired. Leaderboards. You can build like out of the box. You hit basically a couple buttons for leaderboards, and you have a leaderboard. Teams, if you want, like you saw me kind of hacking that together in FIREBASE. You can do teams much easier in GameSparks. Virtual goods. When you create your project, there's little sections for currencies, and you just like create currencies, and the security around those currencies is just like right there. You don't have to worry about people hacking stuff on the client side and then doing stuff. Maybe you do. Achievements. You can set up achievements. Did you ever use this before for achievements?
Oh yeah.
Does it tie into Steam or anything?
Here's the thing, with Discord, they launched the features that Steam had, they did were stats, leaderboards, and achievements. So we had to basically implement like a module that was half Discord and half GameSparks.
Oh, really?
You kind of had to like jerry-rig the Discord authentication to authenticate you in GameSparks in some unsupported way, because the platform had just come out, so GameSparks didn't have a way to authenticate it yet. We had to call them. It was a whole deal.
Wow.
But yeah, I use most of these.
Cool.
Events too.
Yeah. Multiplayer. Multiplayer. I didn't get to play around with that because it's only available at enterprise tiers now. As of February, I'll talk about this later, I think. As of like February this year, many of the features have been pushed outside of the free and cheap tiers and into enterprise only tier. which is basically you call them up and you negotiate what you need. I don't know what that conversation looks like, but yeah, talk about that in a little bit. Messages, that's one thing that I would not want to do in Firebase. Like you can create like messages, like how words with friends lets you talk to your friends. You can do that kind of thing in this out of the box. Create like downloadables. Again, in Firebase you could do that, but you have to create an asset and then properties. I didn't talk about that in Firebase, but basically if you want to change the configuration of your game, not deploying new code, you would do that by creating a properties list, and then when someone starts the game, pulling that list down. And then cloud code is the same thing that we talked about earlier, where you write some JSON and then put it out there, and you can run it however you want. I didn't see a lot about tying. Oh, that's true. Yeah, you can tie this into whatever other thing you want to. Okay. Phew. Okay, this is stuff that I found. If I got any of this wrong, please let me know. So a lot of the game functions come out of the box, which we talked about. Cloud functions and MongoDB access are grouped, or like essentially instead of having your database be one thing you can do and your cloud functions be another thing you can do, GameSparks seems to combine the two. There's no real authentication around the database because access to the database all goes through cloud functions that you write. So you're going to have to write JavaScript for sure to access anything in CloudSparks. And even that, all the built-in stuff, it's basically just setting up data that you can see if you want to. You can see the structure of their data and how they're implementing all this stuff, which is weird to me because it shows you just how most of their features are kind of smoke and mirrors, just built around allowing you to do the kind of things you can do in Firebase without having to do as much legwork. And they show you very transparently that that's what they're doing. It's pretty weird. This was weird. They have support for Unity and Unreal, which I expected. Construct 2. I had no idea how you, like, what? Okay. Action script.
Wait, it still supports ActionScript?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Android, iOS, JavaScript, Cocos 2D, like pretty much anything people do games in, it supports, which I did not expect Construct 2. It's super weird. What games are in Construct 2 that are big enough to use this? Yeah, the real-time features I talked about earlier are no longer available on the free tier. The cloud code's written in JavaScript, runs in the cloud. It has really good documentation. There's one of the interesting tutorials that you should look at if you're interested in this. If you go to their documentation and search for Hearthstone, there's a tutorial specifically around creating a Hearthstone style game where they walk you through all of the things you need to make a Hearthstone. I didn't think about this until I looked at the tutorial, but one of those things is like you call a function to draw a card, and it's got all of your cards, all of the possible cards, and then all of your decks stored in the cloud, and you're just hitting a button and it's going to pull the card out for you. It keeps you from cheating, and they would even allow you to do things like who wins a battle in the cloud, so you can adjust your game logic while people are playing. So, yeah, and good documentation for most things. This drove me, okay, so the pricing changed as of February, which I didn't realize when I proposed this, when I was going to do this talk, because I don't think it's really a good choice for most people in our community. The default price, once you get out of development, it's $300 a month, and then 0.008 pennies per user after the first 37,375. I don't know what that number means. Yeah. So so it does a lot for you and simplifies it a lot, but it also is really, really expensive, and it's not really worth the risk, in my opinion. Also, they were bought by Amazon last year, and since then, they have done more of this kind of thing, where they're targeting like big publishers and developers. I don't blame Amazon for that. I think the reason why is because if you look at the App Store, how many games are big? There's like not that many games that are really successful. And if they're stood up and they're supporting like for every million little game, they have one game that is paying them $300 a month. That's probably not going to pay for all of those little games that have 3 and 4 users. So they're doing this because it makes business sense, but it is not. But it turns this into being a good platform for indies to use, to being something that's basically almost entirely for like mid-tier indies and above. So
That number is roughly half of 16-bit.
all right,
Just stays.
that's probably how they got it. Okay, so I'm going to demo kind of what I did, and then we'll have some conclusions. So that price was supposed to be after this, even though it probably doesn't apply to you. You should still pay attention because it's kind of cool. Okay, let's show you the website real quick. Okay, so getting GameSparks into Unity is incredibly simple, worked immediately, and could like it made me very happy, especially after the pain I had with getting FIREBASE to work in Unity. You basically have an API key and a secret. The secret isn't shown here, and I'm not going to show it to you. But once you install GameSparks, it adds a GameSparks section up here, and you just hit Edit Settings. And you just drop them in there, and now it's going to be tied to your account and everything works. No one can see the end of the secret. It's not a big deal. Plus, I'm probably going to close my account down anyways. Yeah, but that's how that works. Come on, get out of here. All right, okay. Yeah, and then when you come in and you create your game, you give it a name. This is those currencies I was talking about. You can set it up to automatically end player sessions after however long, and you can just modify that whenever you want. Yep, and that's when you set up your game. That's really all you need. You can also figure out what you want to toggle on. These are all of the platforms you can integrate with in GameSparks. So it has a lot of the same ones, if not all the same ones, as FIREBASE, except for one thing that I thought was weird. I am using like a username and password authentication, which isn't any of these things. They don't have one that's just like your email. So allowing someone to create an account create an account using their email that's authenticated, I don't know that you can do that out of the box, which I think is strange. So they were basically expecting you to tie into one of these platforms.
There's a username and password system, isn't there?
There's a username and password, but there's no
you
like
can just parse the
email.
username as an email to verify it as an email, and you can pass that as the username in the authentication.
Yeah,
Don't let
yeah.
people
But they're not gonna send an email out and make someone say
no,
okay.
yeah.
That's the part that I think is like
Yeah.
it's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did
But
they
then-
put Discord yet?
Huh?
Scroll down, did they put Discord yet?
I saw it. Yeah.
Oh.
Nope.
Nope.
Twitch. Yep. Twitch. Anyways, and then you can limit your services to certain geographic locations. So that would be how you avoid GDPR. You just cut those guys out.
And then all they have to do is get a VPN and you're fine.
That's right. Yep. I can't remember what I want to show here because it's all kind of the same thing. That's the thing that stood out to me and really made me realize it's like it's not doing anything special. Events. I created an event for get position, and you'll see that get called later. Leaderboards. Looks the same. You just if you want to create one, you say add, and then most of the stuff is you give it a shortcode, and that's how you would reference it in your JSON document. And then just set a bunch of stuff. I'm not really going to get into this stuff, but we'll click through a few so you get the gist of it. This one has a lot of stuff. That's pretty complicated. One of the things that's strange is a lot of this stuff is built in, so all of these messages can be added and removed, but by default when you create a project, it essentially like seeds your database with a whole bunch of stuff. So Cloud Code is the interesting one. Inside of Cloud Code, that's what's backing pretty much everything. You can add arbitrary code to be called when you do a lot of things. So like when you request authentication, you can write code in here that will get called every time someone requests authentication. And then, or every time you get an authentication response. And that can do whatever. So you can sign someone out whenever they authenticate by calling the like in session.
The more useful one is the events, which is partially hidden by that dark border.
Yep, I do. I have an event. Where is? Oh, shoot.
Yeah, it's underneath.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you look at the, you can.
Yeah, these are the ones that I wrote.
I'll just say I wrote those already.
Yep. So you saw the what was it? The events up here. I created like get position and set position. When you do that, those show up in here, so you can call them. You can give them parameters, and like set is going to take 2 parameters. Yeah, so you're gonna wait. It's not actually. Oh, that is set. Yeah, weird. Okay. So yeah. What else? Properties would let you. Come on. Oh. Well. Weird. Yeah, here's game data. Game data. Well, actually, no. Data Explorer is more interesting. Oh, test harness is really interesting too.
No, this GameSparks' portal could be a serious pain sometimes. Yeah, it might be worth.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. Data Explorer. So I created the card table and deck for that following that one Hearthstone. So I've got a couple playing cards in here. Heart Club. So you can just look at the data that you've added. You can also look at, if you click on this, player, and find all the players that exist and look at all their data. And you can see in script data the position of my character, and we'll see this update when I play the game again. Yeah, but the test harness is interesting too. What you can do here is essentially you can create a session on the web and then call some of your methods directly here. Yeah.
Do your events too.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna do that real quick.
So, no, I mean in the test harness you can do your events. I see a log event at the bottom. That's what you left.
Oh yeah.
Left,
Sorry.
Down.
Fourth
Log
from
event.
bottom.
There you go. Log
Yeah.
events, so there you have your 2. So
And
you
you
can
can-
also can simulate logging onto a
Not authorized.
yeah.
So this is what would happen if you're not authenticated and you try to call one of these.
Yeah, so you can simulate the whole flow of authenticate, set your, and then fire your events, and then, exit in the forward, which is nice.
Yep. We'll do that real quick. Authentication request. This is the password. Test user 1. That's another thing. Why is there a space in my username? All right, now I'm authenticated. You can see what auth token I got. See my player ID. And if we call our events again, it does like a breakpoint in here, and you can kind of walk through it if you want. We can hit play, and you'll see what we got back. So it's all kind of tied together, and you can see like very clearly everything that they store, everything that they're doing for you from leaderboards and everything else, and they're all just storing it in the database, and you can see very transparently how they're storing it, which would be really useful if for some reason you wanted to move away from GameSparks in the future, because you could just pick up their like Mongo, I think it's DynamoDB database, and just like drop it into DynamoDB, and then not pay them $300 a month anymore.
Someone wanted you to confirm that it's $300 a month as the base price, or is there like a free tier or anything like that?
The free tier allows like 10 simultaneous users, and it's called development. I don't think you're allowed to publish an app under the development tier. So, yeah. Oops, don't look at my time card. Let's see. I was going to show you the app. Okay. So we're going to switch this over from FIREBASE to GameSparks, and we'll run through some code real quick in here. All right. I did this a little bit differently. You can kind of see it, set position 0.5. This is set up to log your position every time you hit any button at all. So if I go in here, you can see that we're logging different points as I walk around the map. Something interesting, I tried putting logging all of my positions to the update call so that it would consistently update, and it crashed. Well, it didn't crash, but most of the calls seem to fail. So it did not like me doing a whole bunch at the same time, which is very different from FIREBASE, where you have an open socket. You can just update it all you want, and you're not even getting charged for that bandwidth.
I think if that's the rate,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, you can't just like store your game state and then get it in real time unless you do the expensive tier of GameSparks. So yeah, and then the other things like create account. So error registering player because it already exists. Yeah, we'll go back to test user 2. We'll make a new player. So that time it registered. We can sign in with the player. Login worked. I have it set up to log out. Logging out doesn't seem to actually like log you out. And then this stuff I didn't actually create. But now that we've walked around a little bit, if we send this request again, you can see that it was sending the positions as we walked around. Cool. Does anyone have any questions? All right. So, then that's most of what I've got. I have one more slide. It's not that interesting. Okay, in conclusion, use FIREBASE or AWS for your indie games.
Do you know if the platforms like Steam, or I'm pretty sure Discord has a Unity integration, but do you know if like Steam has a Unity integration that's half decent? I feel like there must be, or has somebody.
I think there's people that have made something
I was gonna
themselves,
say.
but I don't think there's anything officially made by Valve.
No.
They won't touch anything except C++. They can't get out of it. They can't get rid of it.
Well, it feels like there could be a market for someone that brings together like all like Unreal, Steam, iOS App Store, Android, and handles the achievements, Game Center, like all of that through a unified platform. But I don't know if anyone's tried that or what that would look like.
I haven't seen anything on
There's
that.
tutorials on YouTube about FIREBASE for like apps, but not a lot for games. And I'm just kind of wondering, you get caught into that wormhole and going to FIREBASE using it for apps, and then all of a sudden you kind of get stuff, which goes to core. There's that much community online, so what do you do? There's not much tutorial out there either. There's limited sites about mobile apps, like progressive apps, things like that, but not for like anything beyond that.
Yeah, what I do is I try to get a project that can iterate quickly and just keep trying stuff until I get it to work. You can debug, you can log stuff in Firebase and kind of see what's happening. That I think is going to be easier in Android or like in Xcode on iOS because you're closer to what it's actually like going to happen. It feels like the logging from the Unity Firebase is not as good as what you get in like the native apps and the mobile apps or mobile development ecosystems. In my experience, the biggest pain I've had in Firebase has been the notifications. Sometimes like people will register for them and they won't get registered and you really won't have any way of knowing until you, like, because it'll work in development. And then suddenly you have an app out and you don't have any idea how many people are not actually getting notifications. So you just have to kind of play around and since there's not really a way to figure it out, you just have to like put a bunch of logs in and try to figure out how to get notifications to actually work on this one weird device that's giving you problems. And it's kind of a pain, but it's like the counter to that is getting closer to the root of what's happening and calling Apple's like notification server directly. And you're going to have the same kind of pains there. It's just kind of abstracting the pain by one level. And if you have problems, you could always do that after you get something set up and it doesn't work right. So, yeah. Did anyone learn anything, or was this like crazy dumb information?
Don't use GameSpark.
Yeah, don't use GameSpark. What?
Yeah, found something to play with.
Yeah, Firebase is super fun to play with.
Have you done the having like two players move around the screen together?
I have.
With the dynamic database?
I have not.
I'm just curious as to what sort of latency issues you might have there with, because they're each getting data from the same source, I guess, but
I mean, you're
still always, when you're on multiplier, you're still having issues of, so I haven't gotten the data from the server yet, and so it's over here, does that cause issues with?
I don't know. I was hoping to like show it and then be able to see how bad it is.
You still have the same issue even with the live server.
Yeah.
It's just you have a potential higher risk of it.
Yeah, Firebase is pretty fast.
Yeah, you can
really
see.
fast. Like it actually uses WebSockets
Yeah.
instead of HTTP and stuff on the covers, so it's literally real time. So like you're talking a dozen milliseconds or so
Yeah.
for round trip and stuff. It's really good.
Yeah. And the other thing that the database does in Firebase is if you have it written the right way and you attempt to store data out there and you're offline for some reason, it'll cache it and then send it when it can. So you're not in danger of data being lost. It's just going to live in a hidden database in your game project that just gets flushed whenever it can actually get a connection.
One thing I would say with Firebase is that I'd recommend using it outside of Unity first. Like, especially if you know like Node.js or if you do any kind of web development, using it in that context, I feel like kind of lowers the learning curve a little bit because there aren't so many layers in between. Yeah, and there's all kinds of documentation about how to do that.
So you know, when you go to kind of practice on like maybe create like a web, like a progressive web something, like an app, and just do that from Firebase and you learn that really well.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like easier, but if you have problems, you can kind of see the problems that occur, which you're probably used to seeing it.
Yeah, and something I just want to say about, I actually rated this with somebody, when I was talking to somebody about sending network data and stuff across. Something to keep in mind too is things like Firebase are really, really simple. And this is why I say starting with like a web app. Because literally all Firebase is for is messaging.
Right.
That's all it does, right? So like when you understand the concept that really all it has are keys and values, and then there's some structure to the keys, and that's about it. That takes away a lot of complexity and a lot of weird stuff with, you know what I mean? It's like all you need to do is save data and get data out, and that's it. And again, once you get into Unity with things like game objects and transforms and all that kind of crap, and when you want to say, well, what, like, that just gets really messy really fast. Everything is a text. That's just the way I think about it. Everything is a text.
But yeah, in the documentation for Firebase, you'll see, like, no matter which platform you pick, you'll basically pick the platform, and it'll give you the code to drop in. Sometimes the usings are missing, and it gets kind of, you have to like look around on the page for what you actually need to include. But yeah, it's pretty simple, and it's unlike JavaScript. It's not really like, this is type safe, so you get autocomplete, make sure that you're calling the right thing. Yeah, I did not.
You get autocomplete without a typeset or without a typeset.
Well, okay, but you get what you actually want.
You can't rely on it.
Yeah, you can't rely on it.
Sorry, that's a fully overnight.
And JavaScript sucks. And
That's quite worse there, sir.
just kidding. But yeah, so who's gonna go try something? Sweet.
Website is the
Yeah, web, I'll do the web app.
is the Unity SDK source for Firebase, or is it?
Well, I mean, it says open source is all Unity's. No, it's not.
It's not.
There's a lot of DLLs that come in with everything, like the socket stuff. That's the issue that I had was with the socket stuff.
Yeah.
And by default, it tries to run the editor like under the wrong kind of socket framework if you're using the .NET 4.4 in Unity, and it just errors out every time. So you have to go in and switch which version of the database DLL it's using for editing specifically, and then I got it to work. Which I've never done that before, but Unity has this. This is pretty cool. I didn't know Unity did this. If this is boring, you can leave. but this is what I had to do to get it to work. So in Firebase editor, there is the Firebase data store. Where is it? That's Crashlytics. No, there's one in plugins. Here, off. I had to go in and toggle which platforms it's using for certain things, and that fixed it because there's like different Firebase auth DLLs in here, depending on what directory you're in. Like iOS has its own, and if you click here, you'll see iOS. So basically, it's using the same API into that DLL, but like inside of it, it's using different technologies, and whatever it was using for .NET 4 didn't work. So I had to go in and toggle some of this stuff, and I had to Google around for that. So if you're having problems getting the database to work, you might have to do the same thing.
That's probably because of the technologies that Apple incorporates versus Google for WebOS.
Versus Mono for the editor. So. Yep. All right. Well, if you don't have any more questions, thank you for coming. Oh, another question.
So, this is probably for GameSparks. How does GameSparks relate to Spatial OS?
To who?
Spatial OS.
I don't know anything about that.
Oh, sorry. I just started hearing about it recently. It sounds like it does a lot of the same stuff that GameSparks does, but it's like the new hotness, apparently. So, and they supposedly have like they have a free tier that you can get all set up and stuff. I haven't
I've
started
heard
it
of
yet.
Spatial OS from the whole Unity updating their terms of use thing.
Oh, right. Yeah. That makes sense.
So they're just another.
Apparently
engine
now,
similar to-
making an MMO for your first game is now within reach.
Nope.
Yeah, improbable. That's it. The top one.
These are all the stuff that uses it.
So it's similar to like Photon, where Unity's built in multiplayer system. Just they support a lot more people on a single server.
It has a free tier. I don't know how high it goes. They're kind of shady around that. Like I haven't seen details about what they support, but I know you get at least one free project, and the default project is like an FPS game. And I've read up on the tech, and it looks pretty cool. Basically, they have like a mesh network of instances that just spin up and down all kind of crap. Probably similar to what FIREBASE does with the functions. So scaling isn't a problem.
Cool.
And then like it's all around entity. I guess my question with relating it to GameSparks was that like it seems to be more about data than like leaderboards and stuff, but like I didn't know, I guess.
So GameSparks is basically, from what I understand, just using DynamoDB for everything, and then using Amazon's basically the what's the thing that lets you run arbitrary JavaScript from AWS?
CC2?
Nope.
Is it not Lambda?
Yeah, it's just using, I think, just Lambdas and DynamoDB, and probably Cognito for auth. It's probably just like abstracting those things, and then making them easier to see for games. When it comes to like multiplayer stuff, it looked like they're not doing anything special at all. They basically give you a port to attach to, and then you handle everything. And they're just like a server that is sitting out there that you can talk to. So I think it might tie into some of the other stuff, but like it really did not seem like, based on their documentation for how to do a multiplayer game, it seemed like they were assuming you know how to write a multiplayer game. And then, yeah, you just like talk to this server to do it.
Wow.
So, and there's documentation that's still available for it. And I was like, I thought it would do more for you, but I guess like if you want to support any kind of multiplayer game, you can't really like prescribe anything. This Hearthstone, you would not want to use that. You would want to use just the way they have it set up.
See that? I think I'm also looking at this now because that's actually what it seems like SpatialOS does. Is it basically you define, so there's these. It uses the entity component framework, like the new Unity thing, the new Unity dots. So you have entities, and entities exist in containers, and then you can execute operations against the inside the containers against entities to do things. And basically what SpatialOS does is it does all of that and ensures that whether you have 10 concurrent players or 1 million concurrent players, everything still operates within a couple milliseconds. Like everything still completes within a couple milliseconds. So it seems pretty cool, but I don't know about leaderboards and crap like that.
Well, I mean, this is the stuff that I think when people say multiplayer game, so I wasn't sure how far I'd get with like that thread. I just wanted to experiment and figure out what things were capable. So that's where I ended up. I probably would have looked into this, but my personal, I don't really like real-time multiplayer games personally that much. So,
I don't think I'm good.
huh? I mean, I like them local, but yeah.
If the listener here does like real-time multiplayer games, it's also worth mentioning that if you have the courage to delve into Unreal, it does have multiplayer like replication, like movement replication, like out of the box that works with Steam. And you can just turn on a couple of options in the INI file, and it will work ready to go. And basically, what we had to do for last year was we took since it was all open source, we took the Steam module and just replaced it with the Discord and GameSparks stuff. And since it all works out of a common interface, it just plugs right in the engine. And you can do again replication over the networks, the Discord or Steam networks blocks as well. So it's another option if you guys really do want to do like first person shooters in the 3D, do replication. That's usually the way to go.
Cool. All right. All right. Does anyone else have any knowledge they want to drop? Cool. All right. Well, thank you for coming. And what do we have coming up Tim? We have anything coming up?
Drink out next week,
Yeah. Is that next week?
or 2 weeks.
It is. Huh?
Sorry.
Yeah, we have a drink up on the second Thursday of this month at,
It's a week from Thursday.
what's it called?
Heavy Riff.
Heavy Riff. It's a brewery with a lot of good beers.
Dogtown.
Yep.
Monsoon.
Yep. That's not. There's no agenda there. It's just come and hang out and drink beer or not drink beer, but come talk to people.
Oh. Yeah, we're doing workups on the last Tuesday of the month.
Okay.
And, so the next one will be. Actually, I don't know if we
What's
should
a
do the
workup?
fourth or the last. I'm debating that. The workups we just hang out and talk and work on our projects. Sometimes just talk.
Where's that gonna happen?
So we had one this just last week, and we were looking at the Schnooks in BERRE. They have an upstairs mezzanine, little like cafe area. It seems all right, so we might stay there as long as it keeps working for us. So
Probably
if
at
we-
least 10 people that showed up last time.
Yeah, we had a good amount. So, and if that doesn't work for you, just hit me up on Discord or Facebook or something. Maybe we'll try some things to you. We were meeting on Saturdays and then just like
Me
we
and
don't see
Steve
what
were showing up, yeah.
So we're trying different days. I think we might do the fourth Tuesday or the last of this.
Because they have races really good on the top.
Isn't it good?
So good.
It's really
Yeah,
solid
why is it animating sometimes?
There's
animation.
like
Yeah,
this-
it's when he's not.
I love the cohesive art style.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
There's something.
Oh yeah.
There you go.
You could say his
It's
walk
really
cycle
good.
is really solid.
Yes. Whee! Oh, that's
Oh
happening.
my god.
Oh wait, guys, this is a development build. It's fine.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fine.
So it's true.
I was gonna say,
Yay.
Naughty Dog would be impressed with the fluidity of my
It's true.
out there.
It's
Good
nice.
animation.
All right. If you want to play, come and play.
The demo up here, you guys.